Hello, this is a presentation about how to write your Chapter 4 of your Phenomenological Dissertation, which is your results section. In its most minimal form, pretty much your results are your meaning units, your themes, and your summaries. Some of these will be included in your Chapter 4 and some of them will not. So we're going to go through all of that. And I'm also going to touch on tables as well. So this presentation is about one way to report your results. Some things are essential and some things are not. So obviously use your judgment, and hopefully this video is helpful to you. So meaning units are the first coding part of your data analysis. However, they are not written in your Chapter 4, in your results section. They are small elements where you begin as you transcribe your interview. After you transcribe your interviews, once you start analyzing those interviews, you start having a lot of small units of meaning that you'll eventually put together after you've done all of those meaning units and start compiling similar meaning units into groups that will be themes. So in this example, I have two meaning units. This is part of a transcript about teaching, a teacher. And there's two meaning units. One is facilitator, and the other one is one who stimulates discussions. And you could have coded it different. It doesn't matter. It has to just make sense to you as the analyzer, the researcher. The quote is, "My role as facilitator is to provide prompts." So I might pull from that one, okay, this is facilitator and providing prompts. I guess that's like stimulating discussions. That's my second meaning unit. And you might end up with quite a few meaning units that speak to stimulating discussions, but you said it different ways, and then you might group that into one cohesive theme later. So I hope that gives you sort of a summary of the importance of meaning units, but there's just way too many of them. This is really for you as the researcher to start organizing, and will not be part of your Chapter 4. The themes will be the first narrative part of your Chapter 4 in your dissertation. So let's move to those. So the themes are always typically always in phenomenological dissertations and in qualitative dissertations. And then these are the combinations of your meaning units. And they form a summary of the phenomenon, but they are not the summary of the phenomenon. So let me explain further on that. They are included with quotes or can be separate from quotes. I'm going to give you an example in this presentation on how to do it separately, but you can also include them within your themes as well. Different ways to do that. But you do want to include quotes in your dissertation to support your findings. So you absolutely want to do that. I find that most students like to include the quotes within their themes. So, and I think that's a little easier to understand. So I'm going to show you a different way of including quotes in your dissertation that a lot of students don't do, but can provide more quotations and a larger picture. And last thing to note is that the themes are not the end of your results. It's difficult to understand that. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that I get in the Chapter 4 is that students put in the themes and then that's the end of the results section, and then they just put in a conclusion to the chapter. And I always end up sending it back and saying you need to also include the summary, which is the actual results. So I'm going to get to those summaries in a bit, but just note that the themes are really the beginning, one of the beginning forms of your results section, the first narrations. And before that, in your results, you also want to, you don't have to, but a lot of times it makes things a lot clearer if you have a table of demographics for your participants, and then, noting anything that's relevant. Here it's age, gender, university, how long they've been married, and which year of the PhD program they're in. And this is obviously about doctoral students and marriage. Um, and so all of these are relevant because all of this would be in the data analysis in terms of, how they experience university life and marriage in relation to virtual and face-to-face universities, and also in relation to where they are in age as well, and how long they've been married. So all of these things are really relevant to the results of this particular dissertation, which is why they are in the demographics. So anything that is relevant. Another thing that you might want to include prior to your theme narration, I think makes it uh, a much better dissertation, is a table of themes. Now, this is just a short table of a portion of a table of themes. But the way that this is organized is that there are 6 participants, and they are organized from the theme that loaded the most to the least. And this would go down all the way down to maybe you only had 1 or 2 participants that loaded on a certain theme. But this is from most to least, and so it's easy to present the themes in terms of, okay, what's the themes of the actual phenomenon of this population, and maybe what is maybe some things that may be related to some but not others, and just may not really be speak truly to the phenomenon. And this is also really helpful for you as a student, the researcher, in terms of starting to organize your themes to get ready to put into a summary format. And you're going to note your themes, uh, all of your dominant themes in your themes, but you also want to note some of the ones maybe that not everybody loaded on, or not most loaded on, but maybe important to include in your dissertation. And if you end here at themes and you just note the most dominant themes where mostly your participants loaded on, then that is also problematic because you're not presenting all of your full results. And so all of this is going to happen in your summaries of where the themes loaded, how they loaded, and all of that kind of thing. But anyway, before you present your themes in narrative form, it's nice to have a table. Even if you don't include this in your chapter 4, um, which I always would, but if you choose not to, it's actually really important to have for yourself as the researcher to start to look at your summary so you can put that together correctly. So this is the different portion that I have. Now with themes, like I said, a lot of um, students will put together themes that look like this: childhood conflict, and they'll put in the summaries, and then they'll insert quotes into each theme for each participant, which is fine to do, and it's certain just one way of doing it. Another way that you can do it with the themes, now these are just 2 themes of, perhaps 8 or 9 that came up for this dissertation. But with these themes, if you want to present your quotes differently and really do a bigger picture of themes for each participant, you could do it this way in situated narratives. And this is also a way to analyze your data and start putting that together in your analysis that you wouldn't necessarily have in your results section written down. But this would be typically, because it's so long, it would be located in your appendices. So this would be one appendix, situated narratives. And so for childhood conflict, which you see as one theme, and then the other theme I presented here is feeling disconnection from a parent. So none of these themes here have quotes within them. So these all are just very long descriptions of each theme for each participant. And you can see the first theme is not as long as the second, but you can see how much more room quotes would take up if you chose to insert them, which would be fine. Like I said, this is just a different way of doing it. Um, so uh, if you chose to do it in this way with the situated narratives, all of the quotes would now go into your appendix um, under situated narratives. So for each theme, childhood conflict, you see I have a quote for each participant. This is just a shorter version, so the slide isn't too cluttered, but I would have actually a quote from all participants. Um, from these themes. I have 6 participants, and so I would have all 6 quotes here under childhood conflict because all participants reported on having childhood conflict. And then as I go down, the second theme is feeling disconnected from a parent. And all participants also felt that way, so I would have 6 quotes for that. And I would go on for each theme all the way down through the table down to, let's pretend that this is the end of the table. It's not, but if it's the end of the table under problems in marriage, I would note that as a theme that is dominant, but I would only have 4 quotes in my situated narrative, obviously, because there's only 4 that reported on it. And then if I only have, say, 2 um, participants that loaded on a certain theme, but it's noteworthy, I would still have that in my table. But I may not discuss it as a theme. You could have it as, a different heading for, I don't want to say outliers, but for lack of a better word, something like that. Or you could leave the ones that weren't dominant at all completely out and just note them in your summaries, which is the way that I like to do, so you're not cluttered with themes because you're going to mention them later. And if it's not loading on a whole bunch, but perhaps 2 out of the 6 did experience something, and then maybe someone does another study, and perhaps the 6 in that study, 3 of them experience that. So it's important to note also for future studies to have all of that, and then all of your analysis is in your dissertation if you do it this way, but you're not overloading your chapter 4 with quotations and every little bit that you have included. So your appendices are really, really good for that. So after you note all of your themes in your chapter 4, whether you're inserting quotes or not, your next step would be a general narrative. And of course, you can have different terms for these headings. These are taken from Georgie's books on research. So the general narrative is now a summary of all of your themes put together into one summary, and this is from the ones that loaded all the way to the ones that didn't, maybe only loaded maybe 2 out of 6, or not as many, and you're going to summarize everything into your participants' experiences. And this is in the general narrative is about your sample, who you interviewed. So this is an example, all participants had family conflict. They experienced disconnectedness. It was due to the counseling support groups, and I go on. All participants explored as they grew up in childhood, et cetera, et cetera. And then as I went through, maybe only 4 loaded on creating a hierarchy, or I'm sorry, problems in the marriage. Maybe only 4 of those loaded. Okay, so it's not all, but it's definitely a theme, right? And so in my general narrative, I might write some of the participants experienced conflict in marriage, and then going through that experience and noting that in the summary. So you want to go maybe like all, some, and then I'm sorry, all, maybe all, and then most, and then some. However you choose your language, and then 2 out of the 6 experience this, something like that. If you wanted to note any ones that really didn't load too much, but it is worth noting, you could put that all in your general narrative. So anyway, this is sort of where you organize your table of themes that you put together. So this is where this form is really helpful in putting together this general narrative. Also, what is important, because you are not simply doing a qualitative dissertation, you are doing a phenomenological dissertation, be it hermeneutic, transcendental, or some other form of combinations or differences in philosophy. You would want to incorporate theory, your phenomenological theory, into your narrative. And here, for the purposes of being new researchers, I advise students to stick to either Husserl or Heidegger. So you can see my video about that, how to write a phenomenological dissertation, for more guidance on that if you haven't seen that, on how to pick a theory. But obviously in your chapter 4, you would have already done that. So I want to go over how to incorporate theory into your general narrative. This is typically where I like to do it, as opposed to worrying about it inserting into themes, because in your themes, you still don't have it all together. You have these in pieces. And so to sort of try to put theory into each piece, I think would fare disjointed uh, dissertation. Whereas once you have it in a narrative, now you can put it all in summary form, and then you can say, okay, now I can go back and insert the theory piece into it, and you can do that in 2 steps. One is sort of summarizing it, and here's a straight experience, and then thinking about it in relation to theory and in relation to what Husserl might say about phenomenology, or what Heidegger says about phenomenology, whichever one you're using, or hermeneutic or transcendental. So let me go over how to do that for either theory. So feel free to skip some slides if you're working on hermeneutic instead of transcendental, as I'm going to start with the transcendental first. So if you're doing transcendental phenomenology, which is obviously Husserl, you will want to include within your general narrative how your participants experienced horizon. Okay, so this is all, like, again, explained all in my previous um, video presentation. So stop here if you haven't seen that. Watch that first, because none of this will make sense if you're not familiar with Husserl. So assuming that you are, horizon is where you want to discuss in terms of your participants' experiences. Um, so what might one not have been able to see because of their current situatedness? Was there a realization later for your participants about certain ideas or understandings? And so this is something that you want to think about, and then pull back and put that into your general narrative about your participants. The second piece is intentionality. So you want to identify examples of your participants' intentionality. That's their consciousness of something that's directed by the horizon, of what something means or how something is perceived at that time. So how is something perceived at that time? The other portion, if you are not doing transcendental, is hermeneutic. And in hermeneutic, you're going to have your general narrative, you're going to summarize it, just the experiences, and then you want to layer with the theory of hermeneutics, which is Heidegger. So Dasein is how your participants were being in the world. That's Heidegger's terms, being in the world. That's what Dasein means. So how did they find themselves in situations that were not of their making? How did they actualize their Dasein or fail to actualize? So how were they being in the world? Is the portion that you want to make sure that is in your general narrative as you think about these things. This is not something that you have to, go back and re-interview your participants about. It's, this should all be already in your summary of that experience. The second is foresight or foreconception. So what were your participants' preconceived knowledge about certain experiences or situations that they had, and how did their knowledge change? And lastly, the hermeneutic circle. How did participants revise their interpretations or understandings about different situations in their experiences? And so those three elements should really be in your summary. You can include more depending on what you included in your framework and the things that you highlighted. I tried to keep it as basic as I could here. Those are the three biggies in terms of hermeneutics. And so that is your general narrative. That is your participants' experiences. And so once you have all of that done, the last step is basically converting your participants' experiences to the population that you're studying. So it's a shift in focus because remember that your research is not about your 6 participants or 8 participants or 15 participants, whoever you had. That's not your results. What you're presenting on is the phenomenon of the situation, right? And so you're speaking to a certain population. And so that's where you want to include a general summary. So this study is about evangelical males who identify as sexual addicts. And so I'm going to switch from all my participants who had family conflict, and now, all of these other themes that come up, obviously, and now I'm going to switch to a general summary of this population. Now, this particular dissertation also incorporated Van Manen's life worlds, which is something that you can do. Obviously, you can use Van Manen alone, who uses Heidegger, but you also want to include Heidegger as in part of the base phenomenology. But this was an incorporation of Van Manen's life worlds and also Heidegger, which is why a lot of this general summary contains worlds as you read it. You don't need to do that. But I wanted to include this fairly more complex or detailed or a little bit of a different summary. This is also in my book as well, but I thought it was a nice example of different ways to do things. But to keep it simple, you would, obviously not have these life worlds and those sorts of things. So you would just shift from having participants to your general population. Um, the of the phenomenon, the population of the phenomenon. So this is where you would end. So this would be your general summary, and you are officially at the end of your results reporting. You wouldn't go any farther than that in terms of that you would be complete. And some dissertation chairs may or may not want you to discuss your experience of the research. And and some chairs may want to include some of that experience in chapter 5 and not chapter 4. But for the sake of perhaps your chair may want you to speak to your experience in chapter 4. I have included a short summary on how to do that hereafter. So this is really at your discretion, at your chair's discretion, and in your experience. But let's just move on to that as well. So if you needed or wanted to include also your experience of this of these results, you can go through the same process as you did before for either transcendental or hermeneutic, but now you're looking at yourself. So for transcendental, if you're looking at bracketing, now this wasn't included in with your participants, but would be included for you. So bracketing, epoche, phenomenological reduction, all the same thing. You want to discuss how your judgments were suspended to be able to focus on the experience. How did you suspend your judgments in order to analyze the experiences of your participants? Um, and the second thing is horizon. This was, also for your participants. So during your data analysis, what was your present experience? What was your horizon? Okay, so this is the one thing, right, that we can't bracket out according to Husserl is horizon. So this can also be included in chapter 5, like I said before, or it can lead into chapter 5. It just sort of depends on how you write your dissertation, how you choose to write it, and also how your chair would like you to include things in which formats and where. And intentionality. So discuss your level of scrutiny of the data you analyzed. How did you keep your focus on the topic you were studying? Maybe you slowed down or you dwelled on each narrative. Maybe you just didn't just pass over the details. You're really like, talked about the stranger in a strange land. Um, um, you weren't you weren't assuming that you understood things, right? And then in hermeneutic studies, which is Heideggerian, you want to talk about Dasein. How is your Dasein affected? How did this research affect your Dasein? How were you being there in the world with participants, interviewing and analyzing, and all of those? How were you being in the world? And then what was your preconceived knowledge about the phenomenon you were studying? So this is your foresight, your foreconception. What did you think before? What were your biases is one term that you can use. And then the hermeneutic circle. How were your understandings revised whenever you analyzed the data, whenever you were interviewing participants, whenever, at any rate, at any time during your journey through this dissertation process, where were the revisions? How did that happen for you? Reflecting on those things. And that's it. Yep. So that's it for the reflection on your portion as the researcher. So wherever you choose to include that portion of it is up to you, but I thought it was worth noting. And then just to review here, so you have it all together, this is what you want to have in your results. So give or take, depending on how your format is, but a demographic table, your themes table, and then your themes, and then your general narrative, which incorporates your theory. This is your participants' experiences. And then lastly, your general summary, which also incorporates your theory, switching over to your general population. So I hope this was helpful to you. I'm going to link my book in the comments below so that you can access that if you're interested in really a in-depth step-by-step guide on how to do each chapter 1 through 5. I have that in the book, and it's I wrote it as a short book on purpose, so you're not reading 400 pages of my book rather than writing your dissertation, because I remember being a dissertation student and I didn't want to read really big books about writing my dissertation. I just wanted to write it. And so I tried to give as concise knowledge as I could, chapter by chapter, so it's really, really user friendly. And there isn't anything that's unnecessary. And maybe hopefully in the next edition, I can incorporate some other things that maybe I might have missed. So feel free to leave those in the comments as well. Anything that you might have found helpful that maybe was not in it, that you wish you um, would have been included, that would be wonderful for feedback from me. So I hope that this was helpful, and I wish you all the best on your dissertation journey. And I hope that this will offer you a very concise and complete results section.